You think you know me.
Today on Security VIP, we feature the founder and CEO at Brivo, Steve Van Til. Get ready for nothing but the truth.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Security VIP podcast. It's your home for nothing but the truth. As always, I'm your host, Taylor May, and it has been a minute since I've released an episode of the Nothing But the Truth podcast because I've been time constrained and consumed with the SVIP Experience Center. If you're not familiar with the Experience Center, go check out the website. It's a awesome venue that I'm establishing here for the industry, 42,000 square feet, to allow manufacturers to, number one, showcase their products, but really it's built for the end user to entertain and engage with other end users around the best of the best in the security industry. But on today's episode of Nothing But the Truth, I've got the man himself, the CEO, the founder and CEO of Brivo, Mr. Steve Van Til, on the podcast. So Steve, my friend, welcome to SVIP. How are you?
Great. It's good to be here, Taylor. I've been looking forward to this.
Likewise, man, and we'll hit on Brivo. I mean, obviously, everyone knows who Brivo is. I mean, legacy guys, I say, in the industry know who Brivo is, and we'll touch more about the company and what y'all specialize in. But for my listeners, Steve, I mean, we've got over 5,000 listeners here at SVIP who tune in both domestically and globally. Tell us some information, more expertise about yourself, experience, what you bring to the industry before we dive into more of the company.
Yeah, so the short story is that I've been in one form or another of software and product development for my entire career. And I've been in a bunch of different industries. I started out in satellite communications. The first one was one of the earliest geolocation systems. The receivers and the transmitters were so big that back then that they only really worked on trucks, but that was one of the first industries that wanted to know where their assets were and could benefit from that information. Then I got into more general SATCOM, doing telephony systems through satellites. Then I moved into healthcare informatics and did that for 3 or 4 years. And then kind of the big break that connects me more to Brivo, the present, and the way we do things now is I started working for a company called Sapient up in Boston. And they were one of the earliest companies that was doing, when I say systems integration, to your audience, they're probably thinking security systems integration. When I say it in the context of this story I'll tell you about Sapient, it was more general software and IT systems integration. So we were building some of the earliest websites in the industry for big airlines, e-commerce, and that sort of thing. And that's where I finally met some of my co-founders for Brivo, and we decided that since we were in the midst of the dot-com boom, that if we didn't go out and try something in this incredible environment, which is much like the AI environment today, that we'd be kicking ourselves for the rest of our lives. So we branched out, quit our day jobs. Brivo was the ultimate result of that. And 25 years later, here we are, and I'm talking to you.
You're not burnt out yet, man, after 25 years? You don't sell the company or get bought out? You're just still running and gunning, huh?
Yeah, so I get that question a lot, but I will say it's gone quickly, the 25 years. The other thing is, I think if the industry had been stagnant for 25 years, you wouldn't see me sitting here today, but it has kept changing. You could kind of chunk it out in 5 year segments as to what was different each 5 years. Obviously, we started out in the cloud very early, even before people were calling it the cloud. Then, the next big revolution was mobile smartphones, the iPhone. That made security a lot more accessible to people where they were. And then there was a little bit of a drought in terms of major technological shifts. The cloud kept getting better, but now, of course, we're in the midst of AI, and everybody's dragging it into their products. Everybody's dragging it into their workflows. There are obviously many claims out there, some exaggerated, but I'm in the camp that thinks that this is truly a revolutionary technology and is going to make all kinds of things different than we know them today.
Yeah, it's funny. So I've been in the industry for 12 years, mainly on the manufacturer side, video surveillance side, and a lot of the time I've spent my time around startups. So I've worked for, face rec companies, weapon detection companies, LPR, before I took SVIP full time a couple months ago. But the whole concept around AI, the benefit of AI obviously took the it took a lot of time for the industry to adopt AI, number one, but number two, back then, or I say back then, but like 5 years ago when I worked for like a weapon detection manufacturer, it took so long for them to develop that neural net and the computer vision analytics behind it to get that weapon to work in a real world environment. But now, Steve, we see here in 2025 as well as 26, agentic AI agents essentially doing this at light speed where I can literally type in any kind of language like a chat GPT and develop an analytic almost in real time. And so
Mm-hmm.
the shift now from AI perspective to kind of that real time think out of the box, think whatever you want to really create a neural net or a model in real time. I think it's just it's really cool to see how fast the industry has adopted. And I guess from your perspective at Brivo, how are y'all moving with the shift of AI? And I know you guys are cloud access control, but obviously AI is probably a conversation you guys talk about with your customers, if not partners, I would imagine on a day in, day out basis.
Yeah. So we're doing, I think I'm up to a list of 6 different things with AI. Some are in-house development, some are using other people's algorithms that are based on either machine learning or other AI technology. So the very first thing we did was homegrown, and it was a neural network, and
Yeah.
it was used for anomaly detection. So it would compile all the statistics on a per customer, per building, per door, per person basis. And once it had a good learning base for all of the above, then customers could turn on the feature that said, if anything unusual happens, please let me know about it. So that's the, I call it the needle in a haystack feature. And that was the first thing that we deployed several years ago that was quote unquote AI. Since then, if we fast forward a bit, we've been doing facial recognition, we've been doing facial detection to come through video. The thing I'm most excited about right now is we've been introducing natural language interfaces in different parts of the application. So the very first thing that we did was natural language queries so that people wouldn't have to learn all of the ways of querying the database and finding out what they wanted to know. They could just talk to it and refine that. And so that was the very first phase. Then we layered on something that was more input oriented and is in fact agentic, that allows you to do things like create a new user, give system commands. And if you don't understand all of the data elements that you need or that the system needs in order to execute on that, it'll sit there and prompt you and take you through and say, oh, you forgot the email address if you're creating a new user, or you forgot to specify which group they belong to, all of that kind of stuff. So you can basically use this interface with zero knowledge or close to zero knowledge of Brivo. But if you have a pretty good understanding of access control in general, then you're going to be able to get all the way through this common set of application needs without ever consulting a manual, without ever interacting with a GUI.
Do you feel like agentic AI is going to replace, I want to say replace, but maybe increasingly reduce the amount of developers because agentic AI and AI can actually write code or develop code, manipulate code? Because I see it on the after fact where I see there's obviously I spent some time on the cyber side, but there's companies like Black Hat, individuals using AI
Mm-hmm.
for weaponization and exploiting things and using agentic AI for that, where they're deploying agents to get access to confidential information, but they're using AI and they're really not doing a lot of manual work. The AI is doing it for them. So do you see some of that with your own internal team at Brivo where you're supplementing AI when it comes to innovating and iterating around whatever feature set you guys are thinking about next?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple different scenarios. I've been at a lot of conferences where people come up and say, with the AI platforms that we have today, you're going to be able to see a 10-person company hit, 100 million in ARR within the
I've
first two
seen that
years.
too. Yeah, yeah, it's crazy.
And so that wasn't something that you would expect to happen before. What I would say is that right now at Brivo, we're using it to augment the productivity of developers, not to replace them. And I think if you talk to most companies that are writing software today, that's probably the same kind of statement they would give you. The one effect that I've heard from CEOs as large as Microsoft is that they aren't getting rid of people yet, and I put a yet in there, but they think that they can keep their developer pool stable right now. So not grow the developer pool with the size of the company or the scale of the customer base. And of course, that ends up being bad news for the entry level people in software development, just like it is entry level in consulting and entry level in a lot of other industries. So I think we're probably right in that bullseye that a lot of tech companies find themselves in, improving productivity, but not reducing workforce.
Yeah, no, it's a healthy balance between the two, obviously, and it's crazy to me how fast this industry has evolved with agentic AI. Because when I heard about it initially, I was like, ah, yeah, just like anything, you want it to be bulletproof and battle tested. But now I've seen a lot of end users adopt agentic AI because in the past they had to buy one license that did only one thing, which was face rec or license plate
Mm-hmm.
recognition. Like it was one license. That's what it is now. Agentic AI gives you combination of whatever you can think of for analytics, and it's still one license cost. So it's crazy how it evolves, and obviously the new people coming inside the industry. I've said this too. I would love to hear your thoughts. Do you feel like innovation is happening more frequently within the industry, or you think it's taking technology companies now to really innovate the legacy providers in this space? Because from my perspective, this industry, and I'm going against the norm here, but I go against legacy mindsets a lot in the industry where it really takes me to push like I call it the dinosaur mentality, these older individuals to really iterate and innovate around the new challenge sets. And I've seen technology companies from Meta, Facebook, Google, Netflix bring their developers in-house and be able to really light speed, trajectory, things happening here in our industry. So do you feel like it's like innovation's happening because of those technology companies now entering our space, or you still think security is innovating at some kind of speed?
I think it's both. Sort of on a pre AI basis. One of the big quote unquote innovations that was, I think, still rippling through was when first Apple and then the Android platforms announced access control credentials being supported in their wallets. So obviously, wallets have been around for 5, 6, 7 years doing credit card transactions, but it was really one of the signal events where large tech companies said, you know what, access control or security is important enough that we're going to include it in the operating system of our phones. So that was a big event. In the case of AI, where we find ourselves today, there is this notion. I'm going to connect to your question of AI being this mass extinction event for software. And what is meant by that is that in a very short time, for certain kinds of applications, and I emphasize not all kinds of applications, but for certain kinds of applications, a skilled AI developer can use one of these coding platforms and the intrinsic capabilities of the Gen AI underneath it to create applications very, very rapidly. And so you mentioned companies like Meta and others who have said to themselves for a long time, hey, I can't find exactly what I want from traditional vendors inside the security industry. Now it's affordable enough for me to go ahead and develop the specialized capability that I want, especially now that I can do it on top of an AI platform. And I do think you'll see more of that, not just in security, but obviously across the IT spectrum. I think, though, with regard to the industry as a whole, we still have this big moat around us that is physical installation, physical products, edge devices that have to go into buildings. And that's going to limit some of the incursion into security that wouldn't be limited in, let's say, a purely virtual space like graphics or something like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's great points there. There's a company called Swear, Steve. I don't know if you've heard about them, but they came out with a deepfake detection solution. So they're solving deepfakes and the
Mm-hmm.
weaponization of AI. And so you think about every single VMS, I know Eagle Live Course, Genetec, Salient, Milestone, those guys, but you think about the manipulation of content, whether it's like our video right now, whether it's our audio, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
metabytes or whatever. They've developed a patented technology to obviously authenticate every single frame by frame, pixel by pixel, soundbite by soundbite through blockchain technology. And so it will tell you the slightest little difference if something's off to really say, okay, that video of Steve is not authentic. It's not real.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like an independent notary of
Mm-hmm.
content, which you think about that, especially, TikTok's a big thing. There's people using AI videos on TikTok. I've used AI videos myself for SVIP, but they're not legitimate videos. But having some kind of
Mm-hmm.
like notary system on behind that says, hey, this is not really Steve Van Til, so that way
Hmm.
they know. Because I mean, this is happening in schools, Steve, where there's children getting videos or audio messages from, quote unquote parents, and it's not really their parent, right? And so it could
Right.
be, sex offenders, it could be trafficking. And so how do we really validate and authenticate that? So that's one of the technologies that I mentioned about innovation standpoints is Swear doesn't come from the industry, but they come from outside the industry. And they said that, you know what, we're going to tackle this huge problem when it comes to evidence management to authenticating content. There should be something in there that validates, hey, this is not legitimate content, So just something I wanted to throw out there. I don't know if you've seen that yet or not.
I haven't seen them in particular, but personally, I don't believe anything I see online right now because unless it's been validated. So, for example, if I
Unless it's
see it,
Brivo, right? If it's Brivo, it's
well,
legit, right?
yeah, I mean, marketing is going to use this stuff like crazy, so we'll forgive them for that. It's just a more efficient way of generating marketing content. But I think the source matters now more than ever before. So, established old school journalism sources, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, things like that. If they've got a video on their website, you can be sure that they vetted it. So they're leveraging the trust that people already have in them and applying that to a world where videos just aren't trustworthy anymore. So certainly that's true for all of social media where there is no vetting. That's been a big topic for the last 5 or 10 years, and the platforms have shifted their stance on that. First, okay, we're going to do some vetting, and that upset everybody, and now they're not doing any vetting at all. But I look at the photography as one of my hobbies, and what's happening with the camera manufacturers is that they're beginning to embed technology in the camera, tamper-proof, quote unquote, that indicates that the image is from a real camera taking a picture of a real scene by a real person. And while there will no doubt be editing to that in terms of composition and tonality and all the things that one normally does in Photoshop, that digital watermark will still be there and constitute some sort of proof of authenticity. And so I think all the devices that are capturing video, all the devices that are supplying security information are going to eventually have to have that kind of capability, which raises the question of, are there any standards emerging in the security industry that we can all adhere to and our customers can trust for us across the board? Because, the situation of hundreds of manufacturers all relying on a different validation or authentication technique for media, that's not very practical or very helpful for end users either.
Yeah. Well, and to my knowledge, Swear is the only company that has developed kind of a patented deepfake detection solution. Because before that, it was all just training and education and being on alert, for what you think is malicious or manipulated. So I agree. There should be some kind of basic frame line, just like there should be kind of basic security standard in schools, like access control on every damn door. Like I've said that for
Mm-hmm.
years, man. Or because
Yeah.
I said this yesterday. We have fire code for schools. Like fire code is a requirement. But Steve, when's the last time a building burnt down? 60s, 70s, maybe? Why don't we have a basic standard for access control or a basic standard for IP cameras? Like instead of analog, I know that whole analog to IP thing was one thing,
Mm-hmm.
part of our industry, but it's like federal regulation, some kind of basic national standard to have ABC security. I mean, that should be in place. But again, I preach to the choir consistently on this. I just think we should have funding behind that and as a minimum standard.
Yeah, I agree. There are other, when you're thinking specifically of schools, I can't remember the name of the organization, but there is now this movement in architecture to do the architecture of the school, placement of doors, placement of walls, safe spaces inside that form a whole different line of defense, in addition to access control and all the things you're talking about. Because right now, most buildings weren't designed to withstand these kinds of threats. They've got glass all the way around the edge. They've got long hallways that somebody can shoot right down. And so just the buildings themselves need to be more design resistant to these kinds of things. Obviously, that's a big ask. Obviously, that takes generational change. Like buildings have to be 40, 50, 60 years old or more before anybody's going to replace them. And, school systems are pretty notoriously underfunded. They can hardly pay the teachers what they deserve to be paid, and they are very low on supplies. So the idea that any of these big changes in security or architecture are going to take place is unfortunately challenged by the realities of school financing.
Yeah, and retrofitting a 50 or 60-year-old building is also a huge expense for a school district half the time too. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's another conversation too. Steve, obviously I've got two kiddos. I've got a 6-month-old son and a 2-year-old daughter, and we're also debating whether or not to even put them through a public school system
Yeah.
and doing homeschooling. I know that's a conversation too because the active shooting scenarios going on and all the things that kids have to go through with social media and all that. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, does it even make sense to even put your kids through a public school system? Obviously, I played college football and I want my son to
Mm-hmm.
play college football one day and, do that. But it's like, again, I also want my kids just to have basic common sense and be a good human being. So maybe get the basics in school, but at the end of the day, like half the shit I learned in school, even getting my MBA, I don't even use for running the company. So it's like, I
Right.
don't know. I see both sides of the coin, That's a whole different conversation though.
Absolutely. Well, I don't have the statistics, but just, on an anecdotal basis, neighbors that I have, friends that I have, more and more homeschooling
Yeah.
than you saw 15 or 20 years ago, for sure.
Yeah. There's definitely a trend towards that. So let's hit on Brevo a little bit.
Hmm.
Easy question, man. Why access control? I mean, my dad's been in this space for 25 years on the access
Right.
control side. He worked for Acre, Open Options, RS2. He's at Hartman Controls right now, which is a Canadian
Hmm.
access control software player. But why access control, man? You're tired of the Genetechs and Linnells of the world, and you're like, we can do something better and different.
Yeah, we actually got into this in sort of a roundabout way. And like a lot of startups, there's a pivot story involved. So, why access control has a different answer for us than it might for a lot of other companies. I would like to say that we recognize the need for access control. And, we started out thinking about securing people in buildings, but we didn't. When we started the company in 1999, it was the very beginning of e-commerce. And so Amazon was out there, pets.com was out there, everybody, diapers.com was out there. Every product had its own website, right? There was very little unification. But what we saw is that, hey, people are going to worry about getting all this stuff delivered to their front porch or to their building, and that's going to be an inhibitor of e-commerce getting traction. And so we invented this thing. It's an Internet of Things device that was called a smart box. So it was about the size of a dishwasher in the home version. We had bigger versions for companies. It had a cellular radio inside. It had CPU. It had UI buttons on it and all that. And the way it worked was it was connected back into the shippers and the carriers and the homeowner or the business, and provided a network whereby when the shipper created a shipment, they could send a secret code through the network that would end up on the handheld computer of UPS or FedEx or the Postal Service. And then they could unlock this box with that thing, put your thing inside of it. And then, of course, you'd be sitting at work or driving your car, you'd get an email that said, hey, your new digital camera just showed up at your door, and you'd be all happy and go home and then unlock it yourself. So we were developing that. We had a couple hundred of these things out in the field for beta. And then the entire economy crashed. The dot-com bust happened. And so we'd raised tens of millions of dollars already at that point. But to do a consumer device at scale, you need hundreds of millions. And that just wasn't possible to do in that environment. So we went back to our board and said, hey, we've been looking at other uses for this technology, and we discovered this thing called access control. And if you think about it, we had built this whole system in the cloud and developed the IoT firmware and everything to develop a box that's as big as a dishwasher, and a building is really just a very, very large box. And so we pivoted the company in 6 months and then redeployed into commercial access control because we had all the technology pieces worked out already and we're able to do that. And so that's how we got started. And most of us, myself in particular, came from this high tech world, and we knew literally nothing about dealer networks or what their preferences might be. But the one problem that we found that was very common across all of the dealers that we interviewed as we were trying to lock this thing is that the most expensive part of keeping an access control working at their customers was updating the damn PC. And for anybody who was around in the early 2000s, they would remember that every single time Microsoft, and I'm not hitting on them, but they were just the operating system of choice. Every single time they did an update, you were at risk of one or more of your applications breaking.
Right.
And
Yep.
sure enough, those are the kinds of things that would break a lot of security applications. So suddenly somebody's access control system wasn't working. Call up the dealer has to drive out, and it's not just somebody who's a technician for doing the physical parts of the installation. You basically need IT help desk level person that's going to go out there, get the PC working again, do a patch, do whatever, back out, the new operating system update and get it working. And there was very low remuneration for dealers to do that kind of maintenance work on PCs. So when we came in there and we said, "Hey, look, we can get rid of the PC," that was a value prop that the dealers understood because it would eliminate all the truck rolls associated with PC maintenance. And so that was kind of the first hook we had with the dealer community.
Well, personally, I'm a cloud fan, number one, just because the scalability, the update capacity. I mean, I think AWS updates like 100 times a day, and no one knows
Mm-hmm.
about it. So it's just the instantaneous updates. So I guess my question, and it might be kind of a provoking question here, Steve, but is it safe to say that Brivo is simple to install?
I would say so. Yeah, we did some things fairly early on, particularly on the networking side that made it easy to install. One of the questions we got early on is how is this thing going to work when it's behind the customer's firewall? What we did back then, we called it call home technology. Now it's quite commonplace, but back then it was a magic trick. Device would get up onto the network locally. It was using an outbound port in order to connect back to a well-known cloud URL. And that was the trick for getting it to work without a lot of network configuration. The rest of it, I think why people initially considered it really easy to install and probably still do today is that again, remember the environment back then. Everybody who wrote a software program, a desktop software program, had it looking completely different than every other desktop application because there were very few standards and people just went wild with their own imagination. And so everything you had on your desktop was a new learning experience.
Right.
The browser didn't prevent that, but everybody by then already felt comfortable with the browser. So the notion that there was a browser interface, okay, I know how browsers work. You click on stuff, you move around. And that was a paradigm that made it much easier than learning the desktop apps of that era.
No, I agree. I guess my reason I asked that question as far as seamless is because maybe you entertained this model, or maybe you haven't, but like obviously this industry is notorious for going through a channel or a reseller, whether it's OEMs, distribution, or the integrator, the SIs. But recently, Steve, I've seen a lot of, and maybe just because I deal with a lot of enterprise customers, but I see a lot of
Mm-hmm.
enterprise customers that are self-sufficient. I don't need to go through a channel or an integrator. And maybe because it's easy to use or easy to implement. So that's my question. It's like, if an enterprise customer wanted to in purchase Brivo and they see how seamless and easy it is, and maybe they have the team internally to get the install up and running and maintain it and get all the bells and whistles configured, is that a model that Brivo entertains, or is it still strictly through the channel?
So 99% of our business is through the channel.
Yeah.
So we totally endorse that. But the phenomenon that you're describing is something that's going to be more and more common as we move forward. My answer to that would be a little bit nuanced in terms of the use case. So a place where we see that happening is the installation of smart locks in multifamily,
Right.
right? If you've ever done it in your home, it's not that hard. You take the old hardware off, you put the new hardware on. There's some configuration to get it on your network or get it onto your mobile app. But that particular kind of installation, which is a big deal these days, a lot of multifamily are converting, is something that a lot of landlords feel comfortable doing with their building engineers. If you shift the scenario now to commercial real estate and you're looking at the base building, if you're looking at interconnections with fire systems, suddenly you're doing something that requires licensure and expertise, and it's very specific to each jurisdiction that you're working in. And so people are not doing that because they're constrained to not do it by local ordinances. So it really depends where you're looking as to whether the self-installation scenario is practical and permissible, but it's coming.
Yeah, I think it is coming. If not some, I mean, at least from some startups I've mentioned to, it's so easy to implement their technology that they just go to wreck half the time. So, but one of the things I liked about Brivo is because you guys have so many like SMB customers, mom and pop shops to, like could be flower shops, coffee shops, etc.
Yeah.
But you guys can still handle the enterprise, the big guys. By my only caveat there, though, Steve, is I would imagine casinos and gaming is probably not a hot market for you guys because they're predominantly air-gapped closed network environments. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
I'm wrong. Maybe you do have
No,
some
you're
casino environments, but
we do have some casinos, not a lot, and they aren't the big casinos. I think that there are still a number of environments like casinos that are air gapped and will continue to be either traditional client server type applications, or they're basically going to take a cloud application and run it inside the organization. So, airports, a lot of DoD installations, things like that are still in a different category. But I think that's fine. It's a big world. There's a lot of doors out there. There's a lot of buildings out there, and some of them do have different needs that aren't well met by let's say a public cloud infrastructure.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've seen that shift from. I mean, I work with a lot of casinos. That's how I joke with people all the time. That's how we got our house here in Dallas, is because I've sold so many casinos. But I pushed some of my casino friends to entertain more cloud options, whether it's access control, VMS, obviously software driven solutions. So I think there's a shift coming, especially in Oklahoma, because more Oklahoma casinos are adopting kind of a hybrid model between on-prem and cloud
Mm-hmm.
scenarios. So I guess one of the first questions I tell my end users at SVIP, because I've got thousands of end users at SVIP, and I say the first question you should ask a manufacturer whenever you go to a trade show or you get a product presentation is, hey, manufacturer, where do you suck? Now, you don't have to be so vulgar with that question. You can say, hey, what's a weak point or a flaw? And I want to ask you as the CEO of Brivo, everyone's got flaws, everyone has weaknesses, but what is that weak point in Brivo's arsenal that you said, you know what, we need to get this improved upon or strengthened? Is it the air gap or lack of on-prem solution, or is it something else that you're trying to fix and work on?
I don't know. I think, in the early days, we sold air gapped solution. It was basically a standalone panel, and they would go into skiffs and other things like that. Very small scale because it would do, 4 doors, 8 doors in a completely air gapped setting. And that's a limited market, although we're in, thousands of government facilities with that kind of product. I think our focus right now is continuing to add more features to the markets that are well adapted to cloud technology. So these days, our ideal customer profile for enterprise is large distributed organizations, and distributed is really the key word there. People with 500 locations, 1,000 locations, 3,000 locations, because the cloud works really, really
Yep.
well for that. It is distance insensitive. And for anybody that wants to put a single security umbrella over, let's say, an entire retail network, for example, it's the perfect solution. So, we're gonna fish where the fish are, and let the other borderline applications go off to wherever they need to go.
Biggest competitor for Brivo right now? I know we're at the tail end of 25, but is there another competitor that you just see day in, day out?
I wouldn't say that there's anybody we see day in, day out, particularly in the enterprise market. And the reason is we've been in that market. We've built up to that market over 20 plus years, and we've got sizing credentials right now that nobody else has. Our largest single user with the number of people registered to their account has over 1 million people in just
Nice.
their one account. Largest number of locations is in the 4 to 5,000 range, something like that. It's not uncommon for people to have hundreds of thousands of identities in their accounts. So those are benchmarks that, or proof points really, that we have that I don't know of anybody else who has anything that big. So when somebody's looking to bet the farm on a very, very large deployment, we're in great standing. The other market that's been really interesting is multifamily. So we're in a very high growth mode in multifamily. And that's probably not what people expected, let's say 3 or 4 years ago, because there were a couple of companies that kind of famously went public during the SPAC era. And one of them totally face planted, and you know who I'm talking about. The other one, maybe you'd call it a face plant, but certainly a big stumble. And so that left the field clear for us and for a handful of other companies. I'll mention my friends over at Butterfly MX, for example, that got into that market really through the intercom angle. But that's an interesting market. It's funny how competition changes, because if you'd asked me that question in 2008 or 2009 or something like that, it was S2. And the reason was people the reason people even put us in the same category is that both products used a browser interface, totally different architecture behind the browser. But, a lot of buyers can't see through the interface and understand what's behind it. And you can't expect them to. They're not all technologists. But that was something that was a thorn in our side, 15 years ago. But it changes all the time.
I guess the only competition is really just yourselves. How can you be better than the day before, right?
Yeah, that's the key thing. I think right now, one of the things we really take pride on and have invested a lot in, well, two things really. One, cybersecurity. We've been getting audited for 15, 16 years now. So we've got a tremendous history. Even before the current standards of, SOC, SOC 2, et cetera, were out. In the early days, the standards hadn't at all caught up to the technology. So cybersecurity, the amount we've invested in that, the discipline we have around programming, and the way we handle information and privacy, and then resiliency, being able to withstand internet outages, being able to support users in multiple legal domains like the United States and Europe and that sort of thing, and to be able to do that at a very, very high rate of availability. So that's something that you learn how to do over the years. It's not obvious right out of the box, but certainly the platforms like Amazon and Google Cloud and all of those have made those kinds of things, I wouldn't say easy, but easier.
Yeah. Well, cybersecurity is huge now because it's obviously everything's interconnected anyway, and so you need to have a more of an offensive and defensive cybersecurity solution in place for all your products. Steve, as we wrap up here, man, 26 is around the corner. I guess two questions here. Goals for 26, and actually three questions. I lied. Two questions you can answer immediately. Goals for 2026, and then is Brivo always going to stay private, or do you guys have plans to go public eventually?
So goals for 26, I would define that mostly in terms of keeping the momentum that we've developed over the last couple of years, in particular in several of the markets that I mentioned, one being enterprise, another being multifamily. We didn't talk as much about Europe, and so we've been putting a lot of effort into the sales side on Europe. And this past year, growth was over 50% in Europe. And so that's some momentum we've been chasing for a while, and we figured we finally got the right formula over there. So right now, my message to our teams is basically keep on keeping on all of those things. I don't think we have to do big strategy changes or anything like that. We've got a great product. We've got a great team. We've done a lot of fine tuning over the last year. And so keep pushing forward on the things that we do well.
No plans to go public, huh?
Well, that's another thing. So we have shareholders, private shareholders, and I think if you canvassed them, they would be excited by the prospect of eventually going public. And we kind of tested that hypothesis when the SPACs came knocking in 2021, and we went pretty far down the track with one of them. We had filed all the required documentation with the SEC, and by early 2022, even though we were all dressed and ready to go, what we could see is that the stock market in general was beginning to dip, and SPACs in particular were failing pretty much right out of the gate because so many inappropriate companies with little or no revenue had gone out and fallen on their face. And so we decided to pull the offering, but we were very close to going public back then, way before we would have decided to do that in any normal market. But as I said, it tested the hypothesis that our investors would be interested in that kind of an outcome.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll be happy if you ever entertain that. Again, I'm sure the evaluation is growing, if not getting higher, hopefully every single quarter. But I guess my last question, and this is typically just a fun question. It's always fun when I get to have the CEO answer the question. Typically at the end of my episodes, Steve, it's called a hot seat, 60-second hot seat, where
Oh
it's
boy.
why the company, why the organization. But you're the big dog, man, so it should be a cakewalk for you. I guess if I'm someone new, I don't know nothing about access control, know nothing about this industry, why am I investing in Brivo? Why am I picking Brivo? 60 seconds.
So, first of all, we're the most proven system in the market. I think that's very important for any security buyer. With security, you're not out there to try something new that might or might not work. So going with a proven solution is your best move, particularly if you're doing a lot of investment, like the kind of customers I was talking about before that have hundreds or thousands of locations or hundreds of thousands of users. You really can't afford to place your bet on a smaller organization that hasn't demonstrated its ability to operate in those environments. The other things I would say is that because we've been in this business so long, we've got a much bigger feature set than anybody out there in cloud-based access control. And I know that when newbies come and look at this, new end users come and look at access control, everybody's reaction is, you're unlocking the door. What's so hard about that? As you know, and everybody who's in the industry knows, there is an awful lot of access control and a lot of very, very arcane features that people look for. We've built all those things over the years. So if you're a large organization that has very finely tuned security needs, you're going to find not only the scale and the resilience, but also the depth of feature that you need to secure your organization the way you want to.
I just like the word proven, man. I think that sums up everything about Brivo.
Thank
Because
you.
it's funny because obviously there's a bunch of weapon detection guys out there, both concealed and visible. And Garrett Metal Detectors, they're based there in Dallas. They have an office and they've been around for years, of course. But you think of just basic weapon detection or concealed weapon detection, Garrett's been proven. They've been doing that day in and day out for venues and entertainment, airports and stuff. So they also use the word proven, but I like that you use proven because I think that sums up Brivo perfectly.
Yeah. So you just mentioned something that triggered me in a good way, which is that you're sitting there in Dallas, which means that I have to mention that our cloud security summit that we do with Eagle Eye every year is going to be right there in your hometown. We're going to be in Dallas
Good.
in
I went to the one
October
in
of,
Austin this year. I spoke at the
I
one in
know.
Austin.
I
So
know you did. And thank you for joining us. Well, you won't even have to get an airline ticket next year because it's going to be right next to AT&T Stadium. We're not allowed to call
nice.
it Cowboy Stadium. You
Oh,
probably
come
know
on
that.
now. Come
You
on now.
can't do it.
We're gonna have to cancel this episode now, Steve. So
So anyway, we're going to be there in October of next year and certainly hope you can join us again.
yeah, no, I'm gonna be in my backyard, man. I'm in Grapevine, right next to the airport, and I would love to have you guys at my experience center too.
Sure. We
So that
will do a tour.
yeah, the experience center is again free to any manufacturer that wants to have their product showcased. It's a permanent venue, so it's an opportunity I think for manufacturers to just have their product showcased all year round, and it's cool because I get to have my end users now participate in the experience center, and we're putting on 12 events, so it's would love to have Brevo on the doors, man. It'd be kind of a cool
It would be
environment. So, well, Steve, I appreciate the time, my friend. I guess if more people want to learn more about Brevo, the best place to do that is
brevo.com.
there you go, short and sweet. Well, my friend, I hope you have a great holiday and a happy new year, and I really appreciated your time today.
Thanks. Same to you, Taylor.
Awesome. Well, guys and girls, that was Steve Antil, the founder and CEO of Brivo. If you want to learn more about Brivo, make sure to check him out online, whether it's LinkedIn or website. And maybe you should connect with Steve. Can't guarantee he'll respond back to you, but a connection request never hurts anyone. If you want to check out more about our podcast, check us out at svip.news. We're on every single major streaming platform: Spotify, Pandora, YouTube, Apple, Amazon. The list goes on. You guys stay safe out there, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.